reading from Lamentations. This is what I shall tell my heart, and so recover hope. The favors of Yahweh are not all past. His kindnesses are not exhausted. They are renewed every morning. From Psalm 51. Have mercy on me, O God, in your goodness. In your great tenderness, wipe away all my faults. Wash me clean of my guilt and purify me from all my sin. From Paul's letter to the Romans. The only thing that counts is not what humans want or try to do, but the mercy of God. And finally, in the book of Matthew, Jesus says, in your prayers, do not babble on as the pagans do, for they think that by using many words, they will make themselves heard. Do not be like them. Your Father knows what you need, even before you ask him. So in Lent, we have been talking about repentance and freedom, what it means to turn our lives in such a way that we are returning to God and shifting into God's way of doing things as opposed to the ways that we have been going about things. Usually the way that we describe that is sin, that own us, that control us, and that leave us by the side of the road stranded. And so our first week we talked about the way that the 12 steps of the recovery community can kind of give us language for repentance, and we talked about surrender and powerlessness. Step 1 was admitting that we were powerless, that our lives had become unmanageable. Step 2 is coming to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us. Step 3, making a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God. This sense that we are stuck by the side of the road. We can't pretend anymore. And God is the one that can attend to this, and we cannot. Last week we looked at steps 4 and 5, which say that we make a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. And we remembered that as people just bathed in the grace of God from the moment of baptism onward, that we don't have to be afraid to make that moral inventory that otherwise sounds a little soul-crushing, doesn't it? Because we know that we are already held in God's grace. And then step 5, admitting to God, to ourselves, and to another living, breathing human being the exact nature of our wrongs. And we talked a little bit about confession and what it means that when you say it out loud and tell the truth, then it's real. And you have to own it. And once it's out there in the world, then there's some possibility. And the other piece then, of course, is once you've said it out loud, in your own voice, in your own words, to a real person, you're able to hear the words of forgiveness specifically to you in a way that is different than that general confession that we share in every week in worship. So we're on already to step 6. Step 6 says we were entirely ready to have God remove all of these defects of character. Now that sounds pretty obvious. Entirely ready to have God remove all of this. Of course, we want it gone. I want it gone. We have gone to all the trouble of facing up to our helplessness, admitting that sin is a lot bigger than we are, that the systems that we swim in and the soup that surrounds us holds us bound. We've even managed maybe to tell the truth out loud to God and another human being. Why do we need to even say that we're ready to have God remove it? That seems rather obvious. But I wonder if it's because of that word God. We were entirely ready to have God remove all these defects. Because the truth is, at every opportunity that we are given, and some that we are just going to take, we want to do it ourselves, don't we? The truth is we want to do what we can to sneak back into the position of power. We want to do it ourselves, even though it's just that, trying to do it ourselves, that has left us by the side of the road in the first place. If you think about it, in the story of the Garden of Eden, when we are there in the garden and we are given this story that shows us what sin looks like and how it is that we relate to God, the words of the serpent, the ones that really got to the humans, that made them go, you will be like God. Oh, maybe I'll try that, right? We want to be the ones who are in charge. If you've ever had a 2-year-old in your household, you might know this phrase, do it self, right? Do it self. I do it self, or me do it, in a 2-year-old, you don't know if you're going to get a pronoun or not, but do it self. Or sometimes, I've known little ones, they didn't, but self, that's it, just self. And that was enough for everyone around them to understand that the only way that corn was going in was for them to take care of it. The thing is, when we do it self, we are going to do a sloppy, barely identifiable job of attending to the problem. We're going to try to solve our problems by treating the symptoms and maybe replacing one Band-Aid with another one that has Mickey Mouse on it this time. And what we really need are stitches. We will try to solve racism by being sure never to use that one word and believing in our hearts that everyone is equal, and those are both good things, yes. But missing and ignoring and deliberately choosing not to hear the voices of our neighbors that are saying, reality is a lot bigger than this. We're going to swap out one unhealthy coping strategy for another when we try to do it ourselves. We have to be ready to have God remove all of these problems. Richard Rohr says it this way. He says, don't dare go after your faults yourselves, or you will go after the wrong thing, or more commonly, a clever substitute for the real thing, right? We will address the issue just a little bit off to the side because I kind of want to keep it a little bit. Paul says to the Romans, the only thing that counts is not what humans try to do, but the mercy of God. We were entirely ready to have God remove these defects of character, entrusting ourselves into God's hands. But there's this other piece. To be entirely ready for that is a little bit complicated, isn't it? God does all the work, but the truth is we can say no. The truth is we are good at saying no. We're there by the side of the road because we've been so good at saying no. And so there is this waiting. Richard Rohr says, the waiting, the preparing of the mind, softening the heart, deepening our expectation and our desire, actual willingness to change. That's the work of weeks and months and years of fear and trembling. And that's what our step 7, the next one, is about. Humbly asking God to remove our shortcomings. We need to ask. We need to ask. Psalm 51 said, have mercy on me, O God, in your goodness. In your great tenderness, wipe away all my faults. Wash me clean of my guilt. Purify me from all of my sin. I don't know about you, but my first reaction to the language of this particular translation, I don't like it. That image of God in great tenderness, wiping up after my faults, washing me clean. Who wants that sort of intimacy? I don't know. The standard translation, wash me thoroughly from my iniquity and cleanse me from my sin. A little more impersonal. It's a little more comfortable, isn't it? Like maybe there's some sort of car wash machine that we can all go through and be done with it. But this translation, in fact, is really the good one. It gets at all the right things. All those words for cleaning and clearing up are not words that have to do with sweeping out a house. They have to do with wiping away spots and scrubbing laundry on rocks, if you look at the Hebrew, and down by the river. It's hands-on type of stuff. And then that phrase, which our old translation, sort of the standard one, says, in your mercy. This says, in your great tenderness. And that word that we translate as mercy, the root for that word is connected with womb. It's about that visceral care that a mother feels for her child. All of that up close and personal encounter with all my faults, my guilt. It sounds more like someone giving you a sponge bath. And that, well, I'd rather not drag God into that, given the choice. But I can't do it self, any more than you could do it self. It's God who does it. And so we have to ask. Step 7 says we've got to ask. Now, Jesus said God knows. Did you see that in our gospel, in the Matthew reading? God knows what we need even before we ask. So why on earth do we have to do it? Why do we need to ask? The truth is, I need to ask for this entirely too personal encounter between God's tenderness and my big mess, precisely because I don't want to. This business about asking, it's not about God. God does not need me to ask him, but I need to ask. Because our connection with God is always about repentance, about shifting how we operate so that we can be free inside of God's truth. We have to be rewired for a relationship that is about trusting God, relying on God, resting in God instead of ourselves. And you can't think your way into a relationship, right? You have to actually interact for there to be a relationship. We act our way into relationships. And asking is our fundamental way of relating to God. Not expecting, not demanding. We are really good with earned and rights and owed and worked hard for. This is our language. But we ask God. That's the actual truth. God is the source of everything. We didn't create even the breath we just took. We can't get out of the mess we're in the midst of. Prayers of intercession and petition, Richard Rohr says, are the way we situate our lives with honesty in the truth of things. We need to ask so that we can practice our way into being dependent on God, right? We know here that that's the truth, but we live a different truth most of the time. And asking is starting to depend on God. Not as a one-time thing either, right? But moment to moment of asking and depending. Asking is that prayer that shapes us to be grateful. Living a kind of a prayer like that shines a light on what God has planned for us that is better and more satisfying than anything we have been trying to fill ourselves with. It helps us to see that what we have is God's generous gift. The more you say thank you, the more you realize you have to be thankful for. Richard Rohr says, in my experience, if you are not radically grateful every day, resentment will always take over. But for some reason, to ask for your daily bread is to know that it's a gift. Every time you ask for your daily bread, you know that it is a gift. It has been given to you. To not ask is to take your own efforts and needs and goals, your own self, entirely too seriously. So this week, we are invited to reflect. Are we entirely ready to have God remove the patterns of sin that ensnare us? And are we buying into the patience and the time that it's going to take for us to let God do the work? Are we really ready and reconciled to the fact that God's going to do it and not us? Or do we still have a few really good ideas and maybe a little bit more trying hard that we're going to try to squeeze in there? And really the question is, are we asking? Are we asking God to tend to these broken places in our lives? Is prayer a regular part of your life? Is prayer there to shape you for a relationship with God? Where God can shape you to depend on God's love and faithfulness, shape me to learn that kind of gratitude that will fill up all the holes that I've dug for myself. That's our invitation. So as we sit and as we sing, as we invite God to give us a new heart, maybe it's a heart of gratitude and dependence this week.